Good afternoon. Conversations about students who are the first in their families to go to college often revolve around making sure that they're persisting towards graduation and having a good experience in the classroom. Less discussed is the matter of ensuring that first gen students are involved in clubs, activities, and experiential education. I'm Kate Hidalgo Bellows, and I'm a staff reporter with the Chronicle of Higher Education. Thank you for being here today. Today, we're going to talk about helping first generation college students take advantage of the full college experience outside of the classroom and through study abroad. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes. Please send us your questions through the Q&A box. I plan to include them in the second half of our broadcast today. And please remember that this panel discussion is being recorded. We will send an email with the link to the recording in a few days. Thank you to the underwriter of today's broadcast, the University of Texas at San Antonio. We appreciate their support in bringing this conversation to all of you today. Let me mention that my colleague Ian Wilhelm, a Chronicle editor, will do about an 8-minute interview with Tammy Jordan Wyatt, Senior Vice Provost for Student Success at the University of Texas, San Antonio. That'll be about halfway through the broadcast. After that, we will get back to our panel discussion. I'm going to introduce our panelists now. We really appreciate them being here with us today. Brian Guerrero is Associate to the Vice President in the Office of the Vice President of Student Affairs at Metropolitan State University, Denver. Nydia Ruedas-Gracia is an Assistant Professor of Educational Psychology at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Thank you for being here today, both of you. We will get started with our questions now, and thank you to our audience for being here again today. So just to get started, I'd like to hear from both of you about what you hear from first generation college students that you talk to in your capacities about what they want from their college experiences. Brian, if you'd like to go first, then we can go to Nydia.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Kate. Thanks to the Chronicle of Higher Ed as well as UTSA for supporting this. It's really good to spend time and also share this space with Nydia as well. Yeah, when I think about what first generation students say to us as they come to the shores of higher education is just a general curiosity of what exactly this kind of experience, higher education, college actually looks like. As someone whose parents got their degrees from a different country, but yet came into the US higher education context, I know that in my own personal experience, and I've heard this from other first gen students, it's, they want to know that we are there to also not just give them the enriching education, but the support mechanisms that they need in order to be successful. I think that they also maybe don't tell us explicitly, but implicitly share that their communities are really important to them. And it's not like they're being dropped off to our campuses and there's this kind of boundary. I think their expectation and what they hope is how do we include their families, their communities in their aspirations, in their success. I think the other thing that I hear from them is they have goals, really bold aspirational goals that they hold for themselves and for their family members. And they share that with us with the understanding that we will kind of be that support mechanism for them as they go through their journey in higher education. So, but before we dig in a little bit more, it might be helpful to learn a little bit more about my background. I am here at Metropolitan State University of Denver, a very proud public institution in the heart of downtown Denver. Called the Auraria campus. We are also one of the only public institutions in this state that has won the Seal of Excellencia and is a very proud HSI serving campus. Prior to this, I've worked in the University of California system, both at UCLA and Berkeley before heading out to the Midwest at Ohio State University, and then now, of course, here. So I'm excited to be in this conversation, and I would kind of just share those initial thoughts.
Thank you, Brian. I was nodding my head to everything you were saying. So, a little bit of background on my end as well. So, I'm at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, which has been designated a First Gen Forward institution. So, we have quite a critical mass of first generation college students. So, I'm very thankful for events like this and opportunities for people to learn more about the needs and wants and experiences of first generation college students. I myself was also a first generation college student. Neither of my parents got bachelor's degrees. And so it's been very illuminating to serve first generation college students, research the experiences of first generation college students, and relate that back to my experience going through academia. And in an effort not to repeat any of what Brian said, on top of those things, I think some things that have come up for first gen students who have either talked to me directly or who, committees that I'm on, we've discussed kind of the experiences of first gen college students, lies in sometimes not knowing what they don't know, right? And being able to feel safe enough to be able to tell people, I don't even know what to ask right now. I'm not exactly sure what the cultural norms are or who I'm supposed to ask what certain questions to. And so I think part of what's important to me is to be that person, perhaps liaison or something, that can bridge that gap. And so be that person that they can feel comfortable around saying, well, I have this thing, I don't know who to talk to about it. And I can direct them to the right resources. So that's something that I feel like first generation college students come to and ask a lot about. And the second thing would be that I also am constantly reminded that they are complex, holistic individuals. So they come to higher education, obviously wanting a degree, obviously wanting a job after graduation, and obviously wanting to be successful in that sense. But they also are working on their mental health and they're also working on their community's success and even down to choosing their major. They may be looking at majors that where they can tangibly see that they can give back with that new information or that new knowledge to their community because that is a part of their kind of cultural makeup for many of these students. So I also want to highlight that complexity and heterogeneity among first generation college students, that they come with all kinds of different needs and wants, and they're really the ones that I've kind of uh, interacted with are coming in as their full selves and are wanting to be successful holistically.
Thank you for that. I'll start with you for this next question, Nydia. What are some barriers that can stand in the way of first-gen students' full engagement in campus life? And what can colleges do to help remove some of those?
Did you want me to start first?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So I think some of the more obvious ones that are talked about a lot are financial barriers. One quick example that I talk about often with first generation college students, especially first year or transfer students, is that there is a financial aspect of college that kicks in before scholarships come in, before financial aid comes in. Oftentimes, if you want to live in the dorms, you have to make a deposit, and that might come in before you get your all your tuition waivers and any financial assistance. So I think those are some barriers that financially, we understand that there is a barrier, but getting down to those nuances of what exactly those financial barriers are, I think are very helpful. And many universities are doing a great job at trying to narrow those down and support students in that way. And then, I'm biased because of the work that I do, but I focus a lot of my research on sense of belonging. And I think that that's so critical for all students, and especially for first generation college students who might already be coming in with low expectations regarding their belonging. They might not really know, how many other first gen students there are in the university. And sometimes it's not as visible as an identity as maybe other things. And so it might take a while to find a sense of community on campus, and not just to the campus, but also to the majors you're choosing and the internships you want to go in. Sense of belonging to all those different contexts are so important. So I think that's important to think about as well as possible barriers to success.
Yeah. And if I could add on to that, you're spot on, Nidhi. I think one of the inherent barriers that I've seen, and just to share a little bit about, again, a background of where I'm coming from, is I've been prior to my current role in Central, either working in provost office or now in the vice president of student affairs office. I was in career services for a little bit over 20 years. And I would say one of the potential barriers when I think about outside of the classroom is just social networks or social capital. When it comes to, I think Nydia had mentioned internships earlier, but some of our students that have family members who have gone to college or have that capital, it may be easy for them to refer or understand how a particular job search may work. That may be a little bit different, for our students that don't, are kind of like, well, how does an internship work? How do I know what's the difference between service learning and volunteer work and internships? And so I think part of it is education on us to be able to impart to these students and their family members, because we know that they are coming here in addition to that great education, to find a job, right? To find not just livelihood, but something just even beyond that, that's really enriching for them. And so I think that is one potential barrier, right? Is just, these are not systems that are already potentially in place. And so how do we as an institution create those systems of support so that students have equal access to these opportunities that all students should have? I would say that the other thing is just, and this comes out when I used to do a lot of career coaching, but just what are the expectations? How do I engage? And when I mean in terms of expectations is, we know that these students, rightfully so, have a seat at our campuses, can do well, but, little things like, how do I really utilize, this syllabus? And, what are these terms that you utilize? If I'm not doing well academically, what are the expectations in terms of me being able to access resources? So I think that, some of the barriers is really just the ecosystem of higher education and navigating that big system. And so how do we flatten the system so that it's easily understood and so that students can be able to find the resources that they need, and we're able to catch them as these barriers that we've created for them can be mitigated.
Thank you both for that. Brian, I'll start with you for this next question, and then Nydia, feel free to jump in. What are some programs on your campus or others, whether you've worked with them or not, that help first-gen students jump into campus life, and what makes them successful?
Yeah, I would say it starts during the application process and your messaging. It starts at pre-orientation, orientation engagements, because there may be some students that may not even know what first generation is, right? We know that is the case. We use this language. And so how do we start embracing them, socializing these kinds of efforts and engagements so that they understand that it's there for them? I think it's really important that as we think about our program design and even the language that we use, that we sometimes, it may not seem natural, but we also say, hey, these resources are free. Because sometimes, as these students are paying for a college education, they may have these expectations like, are these resources really for free? Or like, are these things that I have to pay for? But I think about, let me take a step back. I think about, I was talking about orientation, pre-orientation. I have been on a number of really great campuses that have done a great job of putting on signature engagements that help students. So when I was talking about that pre-orientation orientation engagement, you know, there needs to be some kind of culminating experience at the beginning that helps these students understand that they're not alone, that they're a part of a cohort. You know, on my campus, we have the, you know, I'm First campus welcome engagements. We highlight a number of different first generation programs during Welcome Week. And also, of course, during Convocation. And then the other kind of component, I think that's really critical at the onset with the programming is to ensure that, especially for students or family members where, you know, English may not necessarily be their first language, that we are providing translation services and you know, translation on things that we may take for granted, like websites, so that it is accessible to these students, to their family members who help activate student engagement. So those are some of the kind of systems that I think about when you think about program design. A great example, like next week, we know it's National First Gen a celebration of our students. So kind of taking advantage of the momentum of those kinds of engagements so that students understand this is for them, that these engagements are something that, you know, is not nickel and diming them, but really to ensure that they are successful in the outcomes that they hope to seek while they're on our campuses.
I agree. I think especially these pre-orientation programs can be very helpful. There's something very powerful in being a first generation college student and knowing the campus when everybody goes in fall semester or fall quarter, and knowing where the dorms are and knowing where the dining halls are, or even having somebody to eat with, right? It's imagine going into a place and not knowing anybody and eating alone. You're eating your first meal alone, right? So there's something really powerful in being there and knowing the culture and the campus. And I think that I would say that I categorize these services and programmings in two ways. One being invitations for first generation college students to learn more about the campus, the culture, and kind of college life. The other category that I've noticed is invitations for the university to tap into the first generation college students' life and experiences. So one example, I saw this online. So I'm grateful for my second screen because I was able to look it up. I don't know how old this is, or maybe it's fairly new, but the University of Minnesota Twin Cities Medical School has an elective course that's called the New Parent slash Caregiver elective. So it's a class that you can take if you have either become a new parent or you're a caregiver to a child or an adult. So this could be elder care, long-term care, hospice care. And essentially, that's an elective class that you take where you are learning from your real life experience and incorporating that into your college experience. So I think tapping into, many first generation college students may be student parents, maybe taking care of their parents or aunts or uncles or children or cousins. And so tapping into what's already existing in their culture and seeing that as a strength and a source of building experience and knowledge can also be another way of strengthening and highlighting to first generation college students that not only are we welcoming them in, but we also understand the culture that they come in with, and we see the connections and the matches between being a successful college student and not having to leave home or forget about home. So that's one example that I saw out there. Another one that I've really liked on campus is that we have a lot of research opportunity programs that makes it really easy for faculty to bring in students from diverse populations, including first-gen college students, and having them on as research assistants in our labs. And particularly if the faculty are also first generation college students, it makes those matches even more clear. The student gets to see a successful example of someone who liked college enough to stay in it forever and make it their career. So I think that those are also some opportunities there to make more matches and to show the, this community that they are welcome and that there are people like them on campus.
Thank you. Um, what strategies do you suggest for working with the parents of first generation college students for whom these experiences may be new for them too? Nydia, would you like to go first?
I was going to, but it looks like Brian has something on his mind already. No? Okay.
You don't go for it. I'll go after you. No worries.
Okay. Um, the first thing that comes to mind is again inviting them in. So something that I used to do when I was an undergrad, and I always encourage my RAs and my students to do, is that I would, for example, take a picture of the classroom before, it started, or I'd call my mom and I'd explain to her, what research lab I was in, and she never understood what I was talking about. But the point is that she now sees where her daughter is going on a daily basis and what her day looks like. Because I think what's sometimes gets lost in the thousands of things that colleges have to do is that for a lot of students, and particularly first generation college students, their parents are sending them off and do not necessarily know where this student is going and how this student spends their day, and what exactly are the responsibilities of a college student. And so I think part of the strategy is bringing parents in, either in person or virtually, but including some events and some programming for parents to be able to better understand what a college campus looks like, what a classroom lecture looks like, and what finals feel like. So that can be something I think on the surface. But I also have been thinking a lot about how a lot of institutions are situated, well, all of them are pretty much situated in real life neighborhoods. And I think that we can strengthen our collaboration and our interactions with the neighborhoods surrounding the universities. Because while it may be the case that first gen students might be coming into that university from another town or from another state, there are many that are close by and that commute. So if we can already start building our connections with the community around the institution, which is right there, we start setting these things in place so that even though first gen students who come out of state or outside of the town or city see that it's not just the university as a place planted in a neighborhood. It's that the neighborhood and the university talk to each other and collaborate with each other and have events with each other. So I think that that would be a great also opportunity for parents in the neighborhood, but also parents outside of the neighborhood to see that the university is connecting with the community around them.
You hit the nail on so many things there, Nydia, but I would just amplify a couple of things. I mean, earlier I was mentioning at a couple of my previous campuses, including this one, where had the privilege to help coordinate the campus-wide convocation. And as part of that, we were very clear in all of our communication and information that our community could seek, that it wasn't isolated to student attendees. And in fact, we encouraged family members, extended family members to be able to attend. And I think that really sets the tone on the trajectory of how the community, how family members perceive themselves as, we talked a little bit about the sense of belonging earlier, but also for them, in addition to, of course, the students. The other thing that I think of is the immersion experiences I was hearing Nydia talk about. So similarly, we do offer as part of open houses, or as admitted students are kind of considering what they're thinking, that they can go through a course or courses like many options of different disciplines, which is terrific. And it allows for them and their family members to see, an instructor, a faculty member, do kind of their not last lecture, but a very important lecture so that people can see and have an appreciation for what their student will experience. I think two other strategies that I've kind of seen is, we talked a little bit about it, but I want to just reemphasize, like for our campus currently, we actually provide an asynchronous, not course, but like virtual modules that family members can take as part of the orientation process. So while their students are also going through orientation, family members can kind of understand different resources, where to go to for what, or if your student needs additional support or care academically around their well-being, what are the resources that you should potentially encourage them to take advantage of? And then that idea that you had mentioned about community involvement and just, being in and of a community rather than kind of this boundary, I think is so important for us to remind ourselves in higher education, the responsibility that we have to the larger society as a whole. I know that when I was at other campuses, not particularly this one yet, but, when we thought about the experiences, maybe that first gen students who often may have to work full time. How do we allow for them to access experiences that will help them be even more competitive for the career goals that they have? And so as part of it, it was, of course, job shadowing, or what some of us in the career space called externships, but certainly hosts for externships or job shadowing, which is really not a heavy lift. Maybe a day or during spring break where family members can actually host students to be able to learn a little bit more about what they do in their full-time work as a good way to expose them to what the world of work may look like, what professionalism may or may not look like, et cetera. So I think getting the community involved and excited and understanding that it is, in addition to the institution's responsibility, the fuller community's responsibility to wrap their hands around them to ensure that they're able to be, again, as competitive as that they would like in their career goals.
Thank you for that, Brian. So now I want to pause for a few minutes, bring my colleague Ian in to conduct his sponsor interview with Tammy. And I'm going to ask the panelists to mute themselves, go off camera. I am going to go off camera. So welcome, Ian.
Hey, thanks, Kate. Thanks for the panelists too. It's been an interesting discussion. I also want to say thanks to everyone who's been sending in their questions so far. Just want to let everyone know we're going to get to more of those in a second with Kate, but they do help inform everything that we have to do here at the Chronicle in terms of our coverage around this issue. Now I want to introduce Tammy Jordan-White, who's Senior Vice Provost for Student Success at the University of Texas at San Antonio, which of course is the sponsor today. Tammy, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I've enjoyed the conversation so far because it dovetails with some things we've talked about before and use a specific phrase about how you all have approached this at your campus when it comes to helping first generation students and beyond, certainly. And that's sort of an ecosystem of support. It's how you've talked about it. Can you talk about a little bit how you built that? And as we see these questions come in, people are looking for examples of, what are the lessons you learned when it came to trying to make sure that ecosystem was broad enough, wide enough, big enough to make sure it supported as many students as possible?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity. And I want to completely say that I appreciate both Brian and Nydia's responses because it's exactly what we're seeing here on our campus as well. And so at UTSA, our approach to student success is grounded in a truly collaborative, cross-functional framework that emphasizes our shared responsibility across the entire institution, which is critically important. We've implemented an organizational structure along with operational practices that reinforce student success as a key initiative on our institution. So we have cross-campus teams that are instrumental in this work. The Academic Council is one of those, which is our core academic affairs leadership team. It's comprised of deans and vice provosts. We meet regularly to ensure academic affairs are in close coordination with our student success initiatives. Additionally, our Vantage team, which was formerly called our Ruby Tuesday team, is comprised of academic support unit executive leaders from student success, like myself, institutional research, strategic enrollment, academic innovation, student affairs, faculty success, and so on. And we meet regularly to advance equitable student experiences and foster a culture of data-informed decision-making. And so a key component of that is our hub and spoke student success model. That's a key component of our ecosystem. And this is where the Division of Student Success, we serve as the hub, and we provide centralized services like First Gen Experience, First Gen Programming, advising, Res Life, success coaching. And then each academic college has its own student success center, both aligning with the college's unique needs and with the needs within our division across the institution, creating a very tailored, unified support network for our students. And so the SSCs, as we call them, the Student Success Centers, report both to the college and the Division of Student Success, where we facilitate, track, assess, and report out on a series of unified goals, metrics, strategic initiatives. And this allows us to stay responsive to our students' needs in ways that are both broad and specialized. One of our key lessons that we've learned is the importance of establishing regular, structured communication channels among these teams so that we maintain alignment. This has been crucial for building trust, maintaining momentum, ensuring that everyone's working toward the same student success goals. And for us, whether that's career engagement, academic support, well-being, or digital fluency. And every year, we create a data-informed strategic plan that helps us set those unified goals and track our progress. And this has been vital for us to identify gaps and also eliminate redundancies, which allows us to optimize our resources and ensure comprehensive support for our students, all of our students, including our first-gen students. So the takeaways for us as we've built out this ecosystem and this journey are consistent collaboration, clear structures, and an unwavering focus on the data. And that has been fundamental to help make this model work for us and our students.
Yeah, I appreciate the point about having different teams come together, as you mentioned, sort of the Ruby Tuesday aspect of it, some of the sort of a socializing, but just making sure everyone is on the same page. And for a campus of the size that you are in terms of the number of students you're serving, even at smaller campuses too, I imagine, but yeah, especially with those larger campuses, this seems like a key thing. We hear it repeatedly of how challenging that can be to get everybody on the page and maintain focus. How important is that to getting to scale, though? Because it seems like we hear about pockets of success here and there at the Chronicle, and we certainly want to know more about those. But there's also the idea of how do you get to this campus-wide thing? Is this the key thing to get to that scale? Is having that coordination, having those clear goals, making sure everyone's on the same page? Is that the biggest piece of this, or are there other parts to it as well?
That's certainly a key piece, but there are other parts as well. Supporting all students at scale, it requires a shift in both structure, but also mindset.
Yeah.
So ensuring that student success becomes embedded into the institutional's culture, you need to have both. And so at UTSA, we've come to realize that scaling support for every student means going beyond just simply building structures. It does require fostering that mindset where student success is everyone's responsibility, from top down, across, sideways. Structurally, we've adopted our hub and spoke model and our core academic affairs leadership teams, which I just spoke about. But equally important is the mindset of collaboration and accountability that we've built. We don't see student success as isolated in one department. Rather, it's woven into the fabric of our institution. And so through this cross-functional approach, we continuously assess data. We have beautiful dashboards and repositories of data. We use that data to help refine our strategies and align our efforts to ensure that our students have access to the support services that they need. So at the heart of this mindset shift is a commitment to data-informed action, is what I would say. At UTSA, we have a high financial needs student population. Just under 50% of our students are Pell eligible. Additionally, just under 50% are first gen, 70% are underrepresented minority, and up to 75% of our students work at least part-time. So similar student populations to what Brian and Nydia were describing. UTSA is also a proud Hispanic serving institution and minority serving institution. So as such, we've implemented evidence-based practices that have been shown to support our student demographics, but at scale, so we can help all of our students succeed. So we've implemented mentoring, faculty coaching, success coaching, appreciative advising methods, as well as what we call our cost of experience efforts to support our undergraduate student population. So our focus has evolved from solely addressing traditional measures of student success to fostering student thriving. We want to ensure that all of our students achieve their fullest potential. And one key area we've targeted is financial support, which was mentioned earlier, right? As so critical. So with a high population of students who demonstrate significant financial need, our past efforts have rightfully focused on assessing the cost of attendance, which helps students afford tuition and fees. However, we've recognized that supporting our students' long-term success and developing career-ready roadrunners and future leaders both in the community and in the workforce require going beyond just tuition support. So to address this, we began focusing on what we call our cost of experience. And this means providing that financial assistance that allows students to not only reduce their work hours, but also to cover expenses associated with engagement in those high-impact experiences. So we have opportunities such as undergraduate research, internships, study abroad. We have programs like our NAGEM Strategist program, where students work with local businesses on real-world challenges, all of which are so invaluable for students' development and growth, right? So by covering the cost of attendance and the cost of experience, we're empowering all of our students, but especially our high financial need and our first-gen students to thrive and fully engage in their educational journeys. So scaling support at UTSA has been just as much about implementing and innovative programs and practices, but also fostering a collaborative culture, a shared vision, as it has been around building this organizational ecosystem and structure. So when everyone's invested in the mission, from leadership all the way to frontline staff, we're able to create an environment where all of our students are supported and it becomes the fabric and in our DNA.
Yeah. Well, Tammy, I really appreciate your time today, and certainly the emphasis here as you end this session on that idea of that the cost of attendance is one part, but obviously the cost of the experience is another big part. We certainly hear about that as well. But Tammy, thanks very much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I've been talking with Tammy Jordan White, who's the Senior Vice Provost for Student Success at the University of Texas at San Antonio, which again is the sponsor, and we appreciate their support today. I'm going to kick things back over to my colleague, Kate, and pick it up with the panel as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ian. If the panelists could please turn their cameras back on, that would be great. I'm going to ask some questions from the Q&A now. So thank you. Feel free to keep posting some, but I will ask some from earlier. So first, one of our attendees asks, I'm interested to know if living on campus can be especially beneficial for first-gen students, and whether there's anything residence life programs can do to benefit first-gen students. Brian, do you want to take a crack at that first?
Yeah, no, absolutely. While I haven't seen recent data, I would likely argue that those that feel that sense of connection to the campus and have access to peers, particularly those that could be peer mentors, such as a resident assistant, are really key in terms of students understanding how to navigate the campus, how to access resources, and quite honestly, probably feel a sense of community in a different way that maybe those that don't live on campus feel, because sometimes there is that disconnect. So I would say that my thinking right now is that yes, residential education, residential life, housing, etc., all of those programs would help a student persist. We know, at least when I did housing a long time ago, the first 6 to 7 weeks, we used to call it the first 6 or 7 week curriculum, where we would build out and design in housing and residential life how RAs were doing programming. So it would start from almost like, how do you negotiate what it looks like between you and your roommate? And then we would move out. What's out from there? And like, how do you get to know your community and your floor? How do you give back to that? How do you get involved? And then you move out from there in the next week. And so as you can tell, it's a kind of this build out so that over time, you know, the student has not just the knowledge, but the community, the inclusion, the sense of belonging that they will hopefully feel after all of that kind of intentional programming, so that they are successful, that again, they understand how to navigate the resources, and they don't feel like they are isolated. Now, we know that those that work in residential life, education, et cetera, also are really key when it comes to creating learning communities. So I would say that, you know, as a particular intervention, you may want to consider that. I know that when I was doing that kind of work a long time ago, you know, there you could cohort students and also connect them with, you know, Nydia talked about earlier, faculty members who are comfortable sharing their identities as a first generation college going student, so that they have role models that show that they are certainly successful, and so can these students. And so I think those are a couple of things that residential life can do to ensure that these students do build that capital on campus and feel comfortable accessing it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, generally the more face time you can get with students, which means please live in the dorms and hang out and do the events and participate and engage. The more FaceTime we can have with students, the more opportunities for the network and to build that different forms, the different forms of capital. But something that I wanted to highlight as well is that there are also, just like first generation college students are heterogeneous, and there's just all kinds of first generation college students. There's also different kinds of campuses and institutions. So I'm assuming that the person that asked that question might be at a campus where the kind of cultural norm is to dorm, or maybe it is to be in the dorms your first couple years or your first year. And some universities have a requirement that you are on campus your first year. But there are a lot of also schools that are mixed and have a pretty large commuter community of students who don't dorm, or they do live in the vicinity but off campus. So I think another thing to think about is that, what does your institution look like in terms of how students are choosing whether to live on campus or not? There are some schools that are heavy, heavy, heavy commuter schools. And so for those, maybe yes, FaceTime would be great, but trying to, being creative in terms of programming and events for commuter students might be great. I know some institutions have commuter lounges, and they make it, easier for students to be able to come in and out, or they have expectations or requirements on the faculty to hold their office hours at certain days, certain times, or even their class lectures at certain times or certain days. So really thinking about what the actual campus culture of your specific institution is, and whether you're getting students that are more likely to commute or not, and then adjusting based on that. Because we do want them, I think, want more face time and want them living on campus. But if that's not the quote unquote vibe of the students at that institution, it's a little bit more difficult to make that happen.
Thank you for that, Nydia. Matt Drew asks, any thoughts on educating instructors / faculty on first generation college students, audience / demographics? I see great instructors out there, and then instructors who just don't understand the student demographic and the challenges outside of the classroom they face. So yeah, just off of that, how do you teach instructors on how to make an experience better for first gen college students? Nydia, would you like to go first?
Sure, I can start. This is me in a dream world, so I can't I am fully aware that this is easier said than done. But something that I've noticed in some of the research that I've done around belonging and mentorship, is that, and we actually have a book chapter coming out with my colleague, is that there's not really a huge incentive for faculty, especially at big R1, like research intensive universities, to do that extra legwork. So, as part of a faculty member, I do have like a service component, and I'm expected to not only mentor students, but also be of service to my field and to my community. But beyond that, that's so broad, and it can be however I interpret it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that I find ways to be of better service to specifically first generation college students. So I think in my dream world, something that would be helpful is to incorporate that into promotion and tenure procedures, where it is valued for you to put in that work as a faculty member in terms of professional development, in terms of mentorship development, um, to add uh, to add it as a institutional value, that we put in the extra work to really strongly mentor first generation college students. Without that, I'm not sure. It's kind of up to that faculty. And I see a lot of first gen faculty and faculty of color take on that invisible quote unquote labor of putting in that work and being very amazing at what they do. And I thank them and I try to be them every day. But I think that if we can somehow institutionalize this as a core to the institution's mission and value, then we can especially start putting more money into professional development, events and workshops, and have it be up front and center instead of kind of just part of the broad service requirement for faculty.
I love that dream world, and I want to add on to it. Just because of, again, my just previous background working really closely, I used to be embedded in a college in the arts and sciences in particular. And then in that role, I also worked really heavily with industry, which is where my perspective is coming from. So when I used to be embedded in a college unit, I think what was really important to my executive dean, to the chairs of the departments, was student success and their performance and wanting to uplift them. And I think starting with that common denominator in mind is always really helpful and a good North Star to have as you start to go into these conversations about teaching and learning. I often would talk to chairs and directors about, is there opportunity to come into a faculty meeting to be able to talk a little bit about the outcomes? What are we seeing from their particular majors? And embedding conversations around particular students in need in terms of the support that they require. So I think that is one piece of the system that you might be able to think about exploring or fostering in the relationship building that you do with our academic partners. I know Nidhi just talked about professional development. I went right to like kind of our Centers for Teaching and Learning, and thinking about how our junior faculty in particular, those that are probably pre-tenure, might be very interested because they are those that just recently went through these experiences based on their most recent training. And so I think that is already a low-hanging fruit to be able to think about that. I know sometimes in the tenure process, it's not incentivized, but I know that at other campuses, there are other ways to incentivize. And what I mean by that is faculty awards. And thinking about how do you create awards and systems of recognition for our faculty that are doing really good work that should be emulated in the classroom. So I think that there are some opportunities there. I think the last thing that I'm thinking about related to my career hat is when I was talking earlier about the success of the students that are coming from the disciplines. At another campus, we used to do a series called Life Beyond Degree. And it really brought in those recent graduates from those degree programs, that we would do programming within the academic space, not in other spaces, but would ask actual faculty to nominate individuals who could be a part of these panels to discuss why this is the major, how it's nimble, how it impacts society, and how they are applying it, even if it was a theoretical discipline. So I think having those conversations and potentially asking faculty to nominate first-generation students to come back is a really cool way to start to plant the seed, and then also show to these other students that are there that, yeah, there are people who are successful, there are alumni that I can reach out to, again, building their capital. So I think those are just a couple of ways that I might think about working with our academic partners.
Thanks for that, Brian and Nydia. Next, someone asked, how do you encourage first gen and often commuting to students to attend orientation and early arrival programs? This person says, we find they often miss these opportunities due to work and family responsibilities. Brian, would you like to go first?
I would, although why I feel like I am with you. I hear you. I see that. I could share like some of the conversations that we're having on my campus currently is we know that those immersion experiences are really core and important. But ensuring that there are what I call on-ramps and off-ramps that are easily accessible, so that if someone is, you know, and I'm sure you're doing this on your campus, so I don't want to placate here, but I do think the long gone are the days that we're going to expect some of our students who have these additional responsibilities to be with us for 2 days and overnight. Like, that's just not something that we think of. We know that it could work with some students, but certainly not necessarily with our first gen population. So we have to think about what are the different modalities, what are the different variation of time offerings, what are ways that we can do things in bite size. So if they're on a break, is it a podcast? Is it something that we can ensure that they're accessing it when they are ready to access it, not when we are ready to offer it? I think that is kind of the key that I think about as we think about either asynchronous or synchronous modalities. So again, probably something that you're doing, but those are some conversations that we've been having on my campus.
I love how you put that, and also, kind of making sure that's when they're ready to access it. I was just thinking about being a first year undergrad and how overwhelmed I was by all the information, the influx of information coming in. And to add on to that, I think part of it is also taking a deep look into what those barriers to participation are. And so, for example, even if the event is free, it's for many first generation college students, it's actually not free. It's a day of work. And so, I know that institutions have different budgetary allowances, but what if we paid you for that day of work that you were going to spend with us here? If they have to go to your campus and pay for parking, and it's expensive, they might not go to that event. So maybe offering free parking. And I'm sure some of these things are probably done out there. So I haven't done a holistic look at what all the institutions are doing. But also one thing I thought up of is, and I know that some institutions have been doing this, but taking a look at where your students are coming from, like geographically. So for example, at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, we actually get quite a critical mass of students, particularly first generation college students from Chicago, which is a 2-hour drive. And so they might not come to some orientation events or some summer events because that requires them to have a car or to find a way down and drive 2 hours, and that sounds like a lot. But we could have events up in Chicago, and I think that they do some events in Chicago. So you can also maybe think about where are your students coming from, and if there are certain parts of the U.S. or not the U.S. that they are particularly located in, maybe having some events in those areas. And you won't catch all the students because we get students from all over. But if we're already noticing that a lot of our first gen students are coming from Chicago, having some events in Chicago that might be more accessible to them might be helpful. And I loved Brian's point of also thinking about making things asynchronous or just being creative about the modalities that these orientation programs come about, because you can really harness what we've been learning the past few years about doing things online and how to effectively create that programming to create programming that can be great for first generation college students.
And if I can add one last thing to that, I was thinking as you were talking, like, timing is key, and for as an example, I was thinking about in previous campuses I've been at, some of our first year writing courses, in particular, some of those gateway courses where some of these students are there in a critical mass. So thinking about, yes, orientation, a lot of information, lot to take in, cognitive overload, but as they're going through, are there post-orientation things as they're going through a particular cycle of flow in their academic progress that, say, in that example of a first-year writing course, maybe after the first course assignment, there may be some interesting feedback, right? And so is that the time where there's marketing or information around the writing center? So it's really thinking not how do we package it all, but how do we piecemeal it when it makes sense, when we know it's really top of mind, when they're really going to need the resource, is also, I think, an opportunity.
Thank you, Brian and Nydia. I'm just going to ask one very quick question, and then I will close the event, or I will do my goodbyes. What questions did each of you, what questions emerged for each of you still on your mind that we didn't get to today, whether they're in the Q&A box or just something that popped up? Like, what are you still thinking about as we leave this discussion?
Is it my turn?
Sure,
Do
you
I
go
go first? Well, I loved all of these questions. I was skimming through them. But I think also one thing that popped up to mind when I read these questions is all the different types of first generation college students you can have, right? So we have first gen students of color, we have first gen students who are parents, we have first gen students who have been in the military, we have first gen transfers. There's just so many different types of first generation college students. And while that can maybe seem overwhelming, I see it as an opportunity for many types of programming and policies that can be made for these types of students. There's just all these different opportunities. And also, when Brian was talking right now, it just reminded me of like that first pre-orientation or those first few weeks of classes. They're not your only opportunity to build sense of belonging, to build capital, and to build this familiarity and support. You have at least 4 years if we keep them through. And so it's important to think about the future years and what they might need their second year or their third year. So I'm thinking about a lot about that now.
Sure. I think one thing that, and I know we're getting close to the end of time, that I would just offer is I often wrestle at campuses, on all my campuses, about like the mindset sometimes as a practitioner we come with related to populations that we know we care about and are concerned. And I often will remind at least the team members that have the privilege to work with all of our students directly that it's important to think about how we use asset language and not deficit, like thinking about it from a deficit, because our students pick up on that. They understand, like, are we doing this because you feel like I'm the at-risk student? I don't know that it's that. It's really more about how do we empower them and make sure that they understand that we see the unique qualities that they have in the fact that they are first gen and remind them of those things. I think that that is really our responsibility, so that it's giving them the confidence to be able to show up fully on our campuses. So that's just one offer that I would give with the 30 seconds we have left.
Great. Thank you both so much. Thanks again to UT San Antonio for underwriting today's presentation. We appreciate your support. Thank you to our producer for this event, Jennifer. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today. And thank you to all of you. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but you should know that they do inform our coverage. And this session was recorded, and we will send a link we will send an email with the link in a couple of days.